The Travis Walton abduction remains one of the most compelling and controversial cases of supposed abduction in the field of ufology. Popularized in the 1993 film Fire in the Sky, the reported experiences of Mr. Walton and his fellow forestry crew members became a hotly debated and highly scrutinized subject. Today, we will be exploring the story of the abduction of Travis Walton. In the fall of 1975, Travis Walton was working as a part of a 7-man crew that was clearing trees on a government contract. The crew were working outside of Snowflake, Arizona in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest. At the end of the workday on November 15th, the crew jumped into Foreman Mike Rogers' pickup truck and began heading back down the mountain. As they drove, they were mystified by a large light that they could see through the trees off to their right. As they continued driving, the road turned to the right and towards the light. They came through an opening in the evergreens and were surprised to see a very luminous object seemingly up in the trees. At first, the consensus was that it might be a crashed plane hanging up in the trees. But as they got closer, they finally got an unobstructed view of the object and were shocked to see a golden disc hovering silently about 20 feet off of the ground. Mike shut off the engine of the truck, and the men gazed for an indeterminate time in absolute awe of the object. Travis later estimated that the golden object was around 15 to 20 feet in diameter and 8 to 10 feet thick. The object was described to have a white dome at the top and no visible windows, portholes, or doors. Travis claimed that he felt the urge to get out of the truck and get closer to inspect it before it flew away. Travis, who was sitting on the passenger side of the truck, slowly opened his door and stepped out. He began quietly stepping towards the vehicle, while his fellow crewmates tried to warn him off and kept insisting that he get back into the truck. Travis had a moment of doubt, looked back at the truck undecidedly, and then stepped resolutely forward towards the object. He later reported that, as he came closer to the object, he could barely make out what he dubbed mechanical noises coming from the object, along with a low rumbling sound of heavy machinery. At this point, Mike yelled to Travis, "Get away from there!" Travis then reported hearing a noticeable swell in the volume of the noises made by the object, at which point he ducked down to the ground. According to his crewmates, it was then that he was enveloped by a blue-green ray of light that shot out of the craft. The beam reportedly blew Travis 10 feet back from where he was standing and knocked him unconscious immediately. Mike instantly fired up the engine of the truck and gunned the gas, sending the remaining crew members back down the road. After about a mile of smashing and crashing down the rough logging road, Mike and his crew came to rest. They were terrified that the object would follow them, but it evidently had not done so. They sat there for some time trying to decide what to do and trying to make sense of what they had just witnessed. Mike finally decided that they had to go back and informed his crew that anyone who did not want to go would be left by the side of the road while the remaining men went back to check on Travis. None of the men wanted to be left alone there. As the crew returned to the spot where Travis had been hit by the light from the object, it was evident that the object was no longer in the area. It also became quickly evident that Travis was no longer laying where they had seen his unconscious body drop to the ground. The men, armed with flashlights and the headlights from the truck, continued searching for some time, but could find no sign of Travis anywhere. It was then decided that they would have to return to town and, no matter how crazy the story sounded, alert the authorities as to what had happened to Travis. According to Travis Walton, he awakened after an indeterminate length of time, feeling extremely weak and with a dry mouth and extreme thirst. His vision was blurry at first, but cleared over time. He came to distinguish that he was on a raised table in a room that appeared to be a doctor's room of some kind. He also came to recognize that the room was oddly triangular in shape. Travis stated that he was certain at this point that he was taken to a hospital by his crewmates, until his eyes finally focused enough that he could really see the shapes that had been moving around in the room. Travis later described the beings as around 4 to 5 feet tall, with large heads, large dark eyes, grayish skin, and devoid of hair. Even in his weakened state, the shock of what he was seeing made Travis instinctively strike out at two of the creatures, making contact with the closest one and pushing it to the floor momentarily. The beings began to come towards him, and at this point Travis was screaming at the creatures, mentally preparing himself to have to fight them off. They then turned and quickly exited the room, giving Travis the opportunity to regather himself. He then made the decision to exit the room via a hallway opposite to where the creatures had exited, and he broke into a fright and run down a narrow corridor. He came to a room further down on the right and decided to hide out there for a while. The room Travis described seemed to be some sort of piloting room, with a chair in the middle of the room that seemed to be used to pilot craft via the mind. While he was experimenting with this strange chair, a human wearing a helmet appeared in the doorway. The human gestured for Travis to follow and took him into what appeared to be an elevator of some sort. The elevator led out to a hangar-type structure with many other objects like the one Travis had seen in the woods. The human eventually led Travis to a room with other helmeted men and women. They reportedly beckoned to him and then led Travis to a table where a mask was placed upon him that knocked him back into unconsciousness. 5 days after Travis had vanished, he reappeared along the highway outside of town. Travis claims that when he awoke, he was lying on his stomach along the highway and looked up to see a silver craft in the sky. After determining where he had been dropped off, Travis made his way to an Exxon gas station down the highway and called his brother Dwayne. Dwayne immediately picked Travis up and took him to see his mother before taking him to a hospital in Phoenix, Arizona. There, Travis was examined by 2 physicians and kept for an extended period of time to monitor his mental and physical well-being. Although it is known that polygraphs are not a foolproof method of detecting truth or deception, it should be noted that they do still hold some intrinsic value when coupled with other means of investigation. With that being said, every member of the crew that Travis and Mike were working with that night passed polygraph tests on more than one occasion before Travis reappeared. It is reported that Travis has taken 17 polygraph tests and passed all but one. In my opinion, this is a clear indication that something strange very evidently did take place on the night of November 15th, 1975. An interesting side note, one of the chief investigators during the 5-day absence of Travis, and during subsequent investigations, has himself stated that he has seen something strange in the sky near the area where Travis reportedly disappeared. There were also a handful of UFO sightings reported in the area in the weeks preceding the supposed abduction. As with every other abduction case, we are unlikely to ever see a smoking gun scenario take place at our current levels of scientific and forensic knowledge. There are thousands of reported cases of abduction, and many of them do make a very compelling case, complete with possible hard evidence in the form of anomalous finds such as reported implants under the skin of the subjects. But even with physical evidence such as this, the leap to an alien intelligence renditioning people for unknown purposes is a leap too far for many. What do you think? And are there any other cases or topics that you would like us to explore? Please leave a comment for me. As always, thank you for joining me on this cursory exploration of the Travis Walton abduction, and please join me next time as I continue to explore conspiracies, the unexplained, high strangeness, and more.